Let's talk about an all too familiar story. A tale of a team with lofty expectations that somehow never ends the way that fans had anticipated. The Toronto Maple Leafs have officially clinched their 9th consecutive playoff berth, and with a handful of games remaining on their schedule at the time of this recording, they now have a chance to win the Atlantic Division and secure a more favorable first-round matchup. Since drafting Auston Matthews back in 2016, qualifying for the playoffs hasn't really been an issue for Toronto. In fact, the team has the third most regular season wins since he came into the league. But despite their regular season success, the Leafs have struggled to find their footing in the postseason, only managing to win one first-round series from 2006 to the present day. So with all that being said, what makes this season different for Toronto? If their fan base and analysts hype them up every year for them to just fall short in the postseason, why should you be putting more stock into this roster compared to previous renditions of this team? Well, today, let's talk about and break down the Toronto Maple Leafs. What's different this year, what's the same, and why this could finally be the year that Toronto pushes through and makes a deep run in the playoffs. Boys. Boys. Had to break out the old Leafs jersey for today's video. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. As you can tell from the start of the video, today we're talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs. An incredible season for the Leafs as they continue to almost get to the top of their division and potentially earn an easier first round matchup this year that, who knows, could change the past for this organization that's had some trouble in the postseason. But after reviewing this team, going through some footage and all of the analytics, I think that this year could be a bit different for Toronto. And for a guy who's typically a Boston fan seeing his team outside of the playoffs, I'm going to need a new team to root for. And again, I might be picking the Leafs based on all the statistics we're going to go through today. So without further ado, let's talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs and explain why this team is way better than you think. At the time of this recording, just around 8 games remain for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but this final stretch is going to be very important for Toronto to avoid a potential matchup with either Florida or Tampa Bay. While there is a lot of confidence surrounding the Leafs this year, there has been some highs and lows throughout the season, so let's start by getting all of the negatives out of the way. Beginning with Auston Matthews, in his first year as captain, he's definitely come down to earth following his 70-goal campaign. But before I talk about all of the numbers with Matthews, I think it's very important to note that he's clearly dealing with some sort of injury. Early reports suggested that it was a back problem, and if that's the case, then it definitely will have a long-term effect on the season and maybe will impact him in the postseason as well. But even with that being said, Matthews has played in 60 games this year, has 29 goals and 69 points. Maybe people see that as a downtick in production, but it's still over a point per game pace, and what he does as a two-way forward and again as a leader, it's pretty invaluable to this team. Now, despite Auston Matthews having a quote-unquote down year, the Leafs still do have a strong record. But we do need to talk about some of the other weak points that critics have pointed out when it comes to Toronto and why this could be a problem for them in the postseason. So what I can gather from some of my research on this team is that people believe they're a middling team in goals against, that they're not much better when it comes to their goal differential, they don't kill penalty kills well, and they also don't control pace of play well at even strength. And looking at some of their numbers, this does back up these points. The Leafs are 16th with their penalty kill percentage, they have a plus 24 goal differential, and a goals against average of 2.92, ranking them 15th throughout the league. Now, these stats I just read off, they tell a certain narrative about the Maple Leafs, and it's definitely geared towards a more negative side of things. But there's also a bunch of positive things about the Maple Leafs that a lot of people like to overlook, and one key factor would be their scoring, which Toronto hasn't had a problem with at all this year, with them getting production not only from their core four, but also from their depth as well. So let's set aside all of the negative stuff now and talk about some positive aspects to this team. Scoring is up in all major categories. Power play percentage, the Leafs are currently 5th in the league with a success rate of 26.1%. They are 9th in goals for per game with an average of 3.92. And lastly, they are 7th in total 5v5 goals this year, all within the top 10 range with some of the best teams across the league. Going back to the core four, this success in scoring can be attributed to the production of Marner, Nylander, and Tavares. Marner in his contract year has been phenomenal. 74 games played, 92 points, and 24 goals, on pace to potentially break his career high in points. Tavares in his contract year as well has seen a bit of a resurgence. 70 points in 68 games played with 36 goals. A lot of noise about him being washed, but his next deal should hit the market and be quite expensive based on these stats. Nylander, who just got his big payday, is living up to the hype. 45 goals this year, 80 points in 75 games played. Just a phenomenal year for Willie Styles. But it's not just the core four who has delivered for the offense in Toronto. They have some newfound goals from younger players like Matthew Knies and Bobby McMahon, who both continue to develop into quite nice players, scoring timely goals within each game. And I think the future in Toronto is going to be solid offensively, and the numbers do support that. Now, let's be honest here. Offensively, the Leafs are incredibly talented and typically don't have any issues when it comes to scoring. But their defense, that's an entirely different story. This year, however, the Leafs finally decided to address this problem, acquiring Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the offseason, and then getting Brandon Carlo from Boston at the trade deadline, which has made them a much more respectable team entering the postseason. But there is one other surprising aspect of this team that people had a lot of questions about going into the season, but a lot of those questions were answered early on, and that's their goaltending. Last season's tandem of Samsonov and Joseph Woll was respectable. However, with Woll's frequent injuries and Samsonov's inconsistencies at times, there was a clear need to address this area of their roster, especially with Sammy's contract coming off the books. In comes Anthony Stolarz, who when healthy has been lights out nearly every game. .920 save percentage, 2.34 goals against average, with 17 wins in 30 games played. Add to this his partner Woll, who is sporting a .906 save percentage and 2.78 goals against average, with 25 wins in 39 games, and you have yourselves a tandem that is tough to beat on any given night. Now, as a team, the Leafs are 5th with their save percentage at .908, which compared to last year's ranking of 22nd with a save percentage of .898 is a major upgrade. The only problem now is who will start for this team in the playoffs. That's a big question mark moving forward. Woll has seen some more action this year, but when Stolarz is healthy, he has much better numbers, and between the pipes, I think there is a better argument for him to be in net for Game 1, especially with how hot he was to start the year. Not a bad problem to have if you're Toronto, especially with all of the goaltending issues you've had in the past, but we have seen this be problematic for teams like Boston, who in the past have been ridiculed for decisions regarding having two stud goalies and how you should tandem them in the postseason, so that will be something to pay attention to moving forward. Last thing I want to touch on is the impact of Coach Berube and some of the slick moves that Brad Treliving has made to help turn this team around. I always like Sheldon Keefe as the head coach for the Leafs, but I just think that Chief is the perfect fit for this room. He knows how to press the right buttons. His system has been flawlessly installed, focusing more on defense and building out their offense through responsible, hard-nosed hockey. It's just exactly what this team needed. And like I mentioned earlier, outside of Auston Matthews, every other player within this lineup has seen significant improvements, and Matthews' downtick is probably more to do with his injury than anything else. As for Treliving, I think he's just done a great job restructuring this team's back end through both the offseason and the trade deadline. And while I still think there's a little bit of work to do with the Marner and Tavares contracts, I think overall he's done a really good job and has made up for some of the past mistakes of this organization, getting this team to a much better place than some of the other teams we've seen with the core four. But in the end, does anyone really care about the Leafs' postseason success? And does it all really just rely on how they perform in the playoffs? Like I said, we can talk all we want about the team, their statistics, and how they've performed throughout the year and what might be different for them heading into the playoffs. But until we see them win a few series and actually reach their potential, all of this, it's just conversation. But like I said, I'm looking for a new team, and I'm starting to believe in this team based on all the stuff we talked about today. So if you're like me and you're believing in the Leafs this year, let me know your favorite aspect of this team, why you think they're better than previous renditions, and why this could potentially be their cup winning year.